Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got another new load that we haven't tried before, and it's one that I'm definitely excited to see how well it can do because based on some previous experiences that I've had with this particular type of slug through this shotgun, we should get some very solid results out of it, but we don't know until we try it, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see what it does. But as for that slug I brought out here today, I got some of these, the Federal TruBall slugs. These ones are the 20 gauge 3-inch 3/4 ounce slug moving about 1700 feet per second, and this will be the first 20 gauge TruBall slug that we've tried on the channel. But to be fair, I have tried a couple of the 2 3/4 inch TruBalls through today's setup just on my own time when I was out on the range, and they looked pretty good. So I'm definitely excited to see what these 3-inch shells can do, because I know they're a pretty stout loading, especially for a 20 gauge shell. They are not very light recoiling, but they should give us good results. And for the setup I've got to run them through, I brought out my Stevens 301 20 gauge. It has a 26-inch barrel, and we have a flush improved cylinder choke in the gun, which is typically a very solid starting point when it comes to a lead rifled slug like this, and we've seen good performances from it before, so we should be good to go today with the improved cylinder. Up on top here is a Nikon inline XR scope. Yes, technically it's a muzzleloader scope, but it will do the job just fine for our testing purposes here today. But we've seen good results from this exact setup before with a rifled slug, so we'll see how it likes the 3-inch TruBalls. So as for today's test, we're going to run it the same as we typically do with these slug tests. I don't have a ton of them, so we have to make do with what I do have. So we'll shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and another 3-shot group at 100 yards. It's not a perfect test, but it should at least tell us if this combination is decent or not. And of course, all those shots will be through the chronograph as well, so we can get our velocity from them. So let's head over here to the bench and start taking our shots and see just what kind of accuracy performance we can get from the 3-inch 3/4 ounce Federal TruBall slugs through this 301. If I can do my part, then I think we should see something pretty decent today. But let's go shoot our groups and just see what we get. Alright, so let's take a peek at our chronograph numbers here real quick before we go look at our target. The boss claim was 1700 feet per second, and I believe we were bouncing right around that 1700 mark. So this 26-inch barrel on this 301 seems to be giving us pretty accurate numbers, but let's go through and see what it actually did give us. So our high was 1730, our low was 1681. That gave us an average of 1698 feet per second, so 2 feet per second under that boss claim. So we're right there, pretty much hitting the nail on the head with where we should be. And of course, here is your energy number on the screen for your muzzle energy out of a 3/4 ounce 20 gauge slug, so you can see what kind of numbers we're pushing down range. But that gave us an extreme spread of 49 feet per second and a standard deviation of 15. So definitely not looking bad at all. As for our muzzle velocities, we're right there where the box says we should be, and relatively consistent, all things considered. But let's go check out our target and see what we got for accuracy. Alright, so now let's take a look at our targets here, because things got pretty interesting, and I think we kind of had some mixed results here. We'll start on the left with our 50-yard target, which was these 3 shots right here, and initially, that looks pretty solid. 2 of them pretty well touching, and 1 just a slight bit out. I'll take that all day long for a 50-yard 20-gauge slug group, but let's measure it and see what the actual spread of it is. Alright, so that 50-yard group gave us 1.42 inches, and that is from center to center on these farthest 2 holes across. So 1.4 inches, I'll take that all day long for a 20 gauge group at 50 yards. That is more than good enough to take on a deer hunt or anything like that. That's going to absolutely get the job done. But let's move over to the right target, which was our 100-yard group, and that's where things got pretty interesting. So our first shot was the one way up here in the top left, and then we hit this guy way down here low off the paper, which is kind of where I expected us to be hitting, is somewhere right in this bottom area, considering we are pretty close to 0 to at 50 with these particular loads. So then my third shot, I believe, was this guy right here in the bottom left corner of this target. So I figured, well, I might have pulled that upper shot up there, maybe. I didn't feel like I did at all. I felt really good about all of these trigger pulls. So I decided to take a fourth shot and see where it landed, and we hit right over here on the bottom right corner of that 50-yard paper. So chances are this bottom three shots right here is probably our realistic group, unfortunately, but who knows? That one flyer up there at the top could have been me, although I definitely don't think it is. And yes, before somebody asked, I did check my scope and all that, and we're perfectly fine with that. No issues there, not a loose scope or rings or base or anything like that, so we're good on that front. And we've seen before where we'll shoot a pretty solid group at 50 yards, but once you get past that 50 yards, some slugs that start to go subsonic have a really strange transition point to where we just kind of open the group up a little bit wildly. It's not been the case for all slugs, but some of them have acted a little weird like this. But I guess I'm going to measure the group here and give you the numbers so we can at least see what it gave us at 100, even though it is not great in the slightest. Alright, so I did measure, and I kind of had to get the tape measure out for these ones, but this bottom three shot group that you see right here that I'm circling, that gave us an 8.2 inch spread. Now from top to bottom, including that flyer there, that's 12.3 inches. So definitely not anything great, that's for sure. So there was clearly something that happened there between 50 and 100 yards that threw off our accuracy by quite a bit. Like I said a second ago, it is not at all the scope. I felt very solid about all of my trigger pulls. The rest was very stable. I'm using a lead sled on a shooting table, so we're good there. It's just another interesting case of what is probably the slug starting to go subsonic, somewhere between 50 and 75 yards, I would say. And that transition just kind of destabilizes them just enough to throw your accuracy off. They're still flying straight, but they're not quite as steady as what they once were. So at 50 yards, that's fantastic results. At 100, I'm not so sure. So if I was going to deer hunt with these, I would probably keep them 50 to 60 yards and you would be just fine. Okay, and here are a couple of the little base pieces out of those shells. These sit right underneath of the slug, and these TruBall slugs use a little plastic like ball bearing that sits on top of this little base wad piece, and when it's fired, it's kind of shoved into the back of the slug, and it's supposed to center the round in the bore. I don't know how accurate that claim actually is, but there is a little dimple right in the middle there. You can kind of see where that ball sits. Couldn't find any of those balls, but all four of these little plastic base tail pieces, whatever you would like to call them, look the same, and they look perfectly fine. Definitely nothing out of the ordinary here. Alright, y'all, well, what did you think about those results right there? At 50 yards, we were looking very nice. We had two touching and one just the slightest little bit out. It was what, 1.4 something inches? I'll take that all day long. But out to 100 yards, that's a little bit different of a story. Again, the scope is perfectly fine on there, I know that, and I felt very good about all of my shots. So something clearly happened, and we've seen similar results like that before, where you shoot a pretty solid group at 50, but somewhere between 50 and 100, there's some kind of change to where the accuracy just doesn't really correlate anymore like it should. Because if we're getting a 1.4 inch group at 50, mathematics tells us we should be getting like a 2.8 inch group or so at 100, and clearly that is not really what we saw. So I guess leave all your thoughts down in the comments. Is that about what you expected? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the 20 gauge TruBall slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? And what do you think is going on here as to why our accuracy decreased so much at 100 yards? I have suspicions that it's probably something to do with that supersonic barrier transition there, just kicking them off that little bit, and that little bit can absolutely make a difference at that kind of range. So leave all your thoughts down in the comments about it. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.